It's important to see the work of the great masters and know it well in order not to start inventing the bicycle. There aren't so many of them, perhaps 5: Dovzhenko, Buñuel, Bergman, Antonioni, Dreyer, and 1 or 2 others. This praise was written down by Andrei Tarkovsky in Sculpting in Time to categorize Ukrainian Soviet film director Alexander Dovzhenko, placing him in a pantheon of filmcraft attainable by very few artists. Dovzhenko was a filmmaker with massive influence on the Soviet cinematic heritage, and is regularly mentioned alongside other notable names from earlier Soviet cinema, such as Eisenstein, Pudovkin, Kuleshov, Vertov, Barnett, and Kozintsev. He is a special artist, however, for being one of the first to truly understand the possibilities of film to convey a narrative beyond standard cinematic references, while parallel to the then highly fashionable Soviet montage, having developed a visual language that could transcend the colloquial entertainment ventures and stiff politically oriented productions, aiming at a much more comprehensive depiction of reality and shortening the gap between film and poetry. Dovzhenko's directorial career spanned nearly 25 years, between 1926 and 1949, but nowadays he is mostly remembered for a short but remarkable string of films released between 1928 and 1930, which has been described as the Ukraine trilogy, and are named Svenigora, Arsenal, and Earth. Although Svenigora and Arsenal will be investigated as well sometime later on this channel, this video provides a thorough look at Earth exclusively, perhaps the most famous of the trilogy and its closing chapter. Despite its current status as a Soviet masterpiece, as some viewers will guess, given the previous video essays on this channel, the film didn't have a universally warm welcome at the time of its exhibition in 1930. Much like Spring in a Small Town in Communist China, Earth was immediately attacked by ideological fundamentalists, in this case being the Bolsheviks, the Communist Party and Red Army officials, state newspapers, and workers' clubs, especially in Moscow, garnering labels such as pro-Kulak and counter-revolutionary, and therefore deemed unfit for general consumption by the masses, which led it to being heavily edited and censored. Though the Russian Civil War had ended 10 years before, the timing of the film was exceptionally delicate, given that the film's background is entirely set in Ukraine, and by then the collectivization of the area was already underway for a couple of years, an event that had severely negative repercussions and had led to revolts in many places already, although the disastrous consequences that most people will recognize as the Holodomor would arise shortly afterward in the following years. Still, the film was lauded, not surprisingly perhaps, in Ukraine by most people, but also in Russia, by the intelligentsia and the avant-garde spheres, for its visual approach and style, and nuanced message, which was of course taken as politically ambiguous and ideologically toxic by more zealous political viewers. Though the film was released during a short step back that halted the collectivization momentarily after criticism was voiced, the event was short-lived, and soon Stalin resumed the transformation process in Ukraine, and the film naturally eclipsed. Dovzhenko was characterized by the most fervent adversaries as a pantheist, biologist, Spinozist, and bourgeois nationalist, some classifications acquiring a somewhat comical flavor by modern standards, but back then carrying a strong disparaging tone that could have brought serious trouble to Dovzhenko. However, these were articulated only by a few of the more radical communist zealots. It's easy to understand some of the visceral allergic reactions and ardent accusations brought against the film and the artist, given the period and place in which it was shown. Other than the dreamlike quality of the visual and narrative style, there's a distinct ambiguity on the message that it tries to put across. The plot deals with the collectivization and development of Ukraine after the Russian Revolution, in an attempt to bring the industry and economy of the Soviet Union to the standards of the rest of the developed world, disclosing the fight between rich or higher income peasants, known as kulaks, and the ordinary, poorer peasants, the latter welcoming the progress that would improve their harsh life, and the former attempting to resist it for personal gain through exploitation of the lower ranks, and afraid they would have their properties seized by the state. There are personal struggles between families, even within families and different generations, but most importantly is the clash between fear and optimism, prejudice and compassion, tradition and modernity, problems set up mainly by the established upper class against the evolution, reform, and the plans for equality and a better way of life for all, in a sense thus being the freedom from misery and life-draining toil for the sake of all and the state as a whole. The film makes a difficult case on the subject of clearly assigning the kulaks and peasants to specific individuals on earlier stages, which is only definitely established after their motivations are evidenced and by their actions. This uncertainty is noticeable, for example, on the sequence following the opening setup of the death of grandfather Semyon, an elder sage that expires not unlike a Zen master in a serene, lucid understanding. By rejecting the heavy-handed, cliched descriptions that usually distinguish these two historical and highly antagonistic parts, Dovzhenko is making the case for a more humane approach to the subject that avoids the typical stereotypes employed on propaganda films. Unlike the bourgeois, Tsarist and White Army prototypical characters in Eisenstein's or Pudovkin's masterworks, Dovzhenko's characters of divergent status are taken more consciously in an ambivalent light, reflecting the author's considerations on mankind, a feature that must have left a sour taste to the then ruling state of affairs. Dovzhenko's Earth also shines brightly thanks to its striking imagery and style, especially in the way it exhibits the Ukrainian land as a dreamy and paradise-like compound of wind-caressed meadows, fertile tree groves, vast virgin grasslands, and primordial woods, betraying the director's acquaintance and fascination of his homeland. Skovoroda, the mystical philosopher and poet from Ukraine, describes in one of his many poems inspired by this Arcadian land something akin to the feeling that is to witness such splendor. The already mentioned sequence at the beginning exalts the Ukrainian farmland to a kind of Garden of Eden status, where people live swaddled by nature, symbiotically in pure bliss, having one of the most unforgettable shots in the film directly associating and comparing human and plant life, as if close relatives stemming from the same origin, and others associating human and other animal life too by encasing them in similar visual constructs. This lyrical imagery and bucolic atmosphere establishes a mood that is then highly contrasting to the mechanical apparatus and technological developments that will forever alter their lifestyle, a disruption brought forth by the approaching tractor and machines that on one hand represent the dreams of a better life for all, regardless of class and upbringing, as according to communist principles, but on the other hand upturns their life by removing the millennial tradition and spiritual bond with the earth, by mechanizing their process and threatening to depersonalize to the point of obliterating this ineffable link. It's a most significant moment in history that is, however, framed in an outstanding montage sequence, in fact one of the most indelible montages in Soviet film history, as the crops are harvested and transformed through the modern innovative means, disclosing the entire process of bread production, all captured by a hypnotic visual dance and vertiginous audio trip, where the organic and synthetic substances are magically whirled together into a life-sustaining creation that is basic and universal. One should mention as well the remarkable beauty and magnificence of Dovzhenko's close-ups of some of the film's actors, placing its peasants in clear heroic fashion, similar to what one would find for example in Eisenstein's Bolshevik Revolutionaries or in Leni Riefenstahl's German Youth, once again showcasing Dovzhenko's laudation of the Ukrainian peasantry not as crude and churlish boors, but as dignified and noble people in spite of their unsophisticated lifestyle. Another marvelous sequence that testifies to Dovzhenko's genius is the tragic assassination of Vasil by the jealous kulak Homa. Despite Vasil's bliss when embracing Natalia and his dance celebrating the successful harvest, there's a strong sense of disconcerting foreboding, perhaps due to the eerily gorgeous shots of light suffusing from the sky and the villagers bathing in it, or maybe due to the otherworldly look of the entire scene and the lengthy duration of the shots featuring Vasil walking across village and wood paths. At some point, however, as Vasil wanders away from the village, he falls down remaining motionless, a scene superbly composed by Dovzhenko, for the audience is placed far from the event in a long shot, and the action is then emphasized by a horse grazing nearby that is startled by what one supposes to be a loud sound. Vasil has fallen and remains still while the raised dust is blown away by the wind, and the faint figure is seen fleeing hurriedly from the place, with the canvas now fading to black and the speakers embracing a disquieting silence. One is left with a feeling akin to being punched unexpectedly in the gut and realizes the tragic outcome of the action. Few scenes in film history have dealt a blow like this so effectively, especially considering this is a silent film from a very early stage in film history, which once again only testifies to Dovzhenko's mastery of the medium. Despite the aforementioned turn of events, it's fascinating to witness how Dovzhenko approaches this untimely death from the point of view of the village and the world in which they live in, without missing the chance of voicing criticism towards the church, as he depicts Vasil's father rejecting the priest's intention to head a funeral and professing his atheism, and having the preacher unjustly cursing the already suffering people. Dovzhenko also turns Vasil into a communist martyr, with the population attending the funeral, and listening to the funeral oration glorifying his deeds and vision, scenes that no doubt were likely to appease to the bitter anti-clerical and fervent idealistic communist authorities. At the same time, the audience witnesses a representation of the cycle of life, both with the contrasting pregnant woman witnessing the mob attending the funeral, and the shower that befalls the fruit groves with their plump apples and watermelons, discoursing visually on the themes of fecundity, rebirth, and cyclicality, for these reflect as well the opening shots of the film, tying the whole piece into a repeating pattern. Ivan Franko, another great Ukrainian poet, addresses the theme of fecundity among natural life with familiarity in his Spring Song poem. While some would declare as a mere coincidence, notice how some of these shots on the fruit grove bring to mind Ivan's childhood, Tarkovsky's first feature film, and a sensational film on its own. If, however, you remember how at the beginning of this essay Tarkovsky is quoted as praising highly the Ukrainian director, such mere coincidence may start to attain more of a tribute resemblance than anything else. As for Years of Dovzhenko, one ought to look specifically at the still mainly undiscovered Ukrainian director and cinematographer Yuri Ilyenko, whose ethnographic and historical films based in Slavic and Balkanic regions, and work as cinematographer with Sergei Parajanov in Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, are awe-inducing, but perhaps also check Terence Malick's Days of Heaven, if looking for a film that exhibits nature and man in timeless harmony captured with much poetic insight. For all the reasons referred above, Earth is not only one of the finest gems of Soviet filmmaking, but in fact one of the great films of the history of the film craft, a film that deserves to be viewed and absorbed by any sensible person that appreciates filmmaking of all eras and countries, one that is interested in the history and culture of mankind. Expect other ventures into Soviet filmmaking and, as already mentioned, into other Dovzhenko masterpieces in the future. If you enjoyed this essay, feel free to like it, subscribe, comment or share it with other cinephiles. Thank you for listening and see you next time.